What's up, fam? It's your boy DKG72, and today we're going to be doing a tribute to civil rights iconic leaders that passed away this weekend on the 17th. Without further ado, let's get right into it. We're going to be doing a tribute drawing to Congressman John Lewis and Reverend C.T. Vivian. Let's go. Alright guys, so you know what it is. I'm not even going to waste the time with a long intro. Basically, let's get started with this drawing and let's talk about the histories of these two gentlemen, just so that you guys understand why these men were so important and why they mean so much to black people, the black community, civil rights community, social justice community as a whole. Let's get into it. Alright guys, so as I get started on this drawing, I'm going to lay everything out in blue pencil first, make sure I get a nice strong sketch going. Then I'm going to go ahead and layer in colors with my Copic markers first, and I may even lay over some colors using the Copic airbrush because I think this might be a good time to try that out. Once I've got the colors overlaid over, of course I'm going to come back in with some inks, and at that point I'm going to have to put this puppy to rest. But while I'm working on it, let's talk about why these men were so important and what they mean to us. And to do that, I'm going to refer back to this article from CNN written by Faith Karimi, which I think really just sums everything up beautifully. So let's talk about that. Two towering figures of the American civil rights movement died Friday, a major loss to a nation still grappling with protests and demands for racial equality decades later. John Robert Lewis died at age 80 after a battle with cancer. Reverend Cordy Tyndale Vivian, also known as C.T. Vivian, died at the age of 95 of natural causes. They died a day before the birthday of the late Nelson Mandela, another renowned champion of racial equality. Both men were the epitome of good trouble, Lewis's favorite saying and approach to confronting injustices without violence. They worked alongside the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in the forefront of the historic struggle for racial justices in the 1960s. So basically, if you guys didn't know, good trouble was John Lewis's catchphrase for what they were doing. These guys were members of the Freedom Riders. They marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. They worked closely with him. John Lewis was one of the keynote speakers at the March on Washington. So again, these guys were integral to the civil rights movements, which led to these Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Civil Rights Acts of 1964 and 68. These were things that these men were integral in working towards. So they've been boots on the ground, they've been putting in the fight, all of that for years and years, and it just a tribute to, you know, those times and the toughness that these guys just represented. So let's get back into their history real quick. At the height of the push for justice, their beatings at the protests galvanized support that led to key changes. After years of arrests, confrontations, and unyielding demands for justice, they received the highest civilian honor from the nation's first black president. Alright, let's talk about John Lewis and talk about some of his accomplishments. John Lewis was more than an icon of the civil rights movement. He was a beloved Georgia congressman, a political force, and an ally for marginalized communities nationwide. The world has lost a legend. The civil rights movement has lost an icon. The city of Atlanta has lost one of its most fearless leaders, and the Congressional Black Caucus has lost our longest serving member. The Congressional Black Caucus said, John Lewis was known as the conscience of our caucus. Lewis, a Democrat who served as the U.S. representative for Georgia's 5th Congressional District for more than 3 decades, was considered a moral conscience of Congress because of his belief in a nonviolent fight for civil rights. His passion for equal rights was backed by a long record of action that included dozens of arrests during protests against racial and social injustice. A follower and colleague of Martin Luther King Jr., he participated in lunch counter sit-ins, joined the Freedom Riders in challenging segregated buses, and at the age of 23 was a keynote speaker at the historic 1963 March on Washington. "We do not want our freedom gradually, we want to be free now," he said at the time. Sometimes when I look back and think about it, how did we do what we did? How did we succeed? We didn't have a website, we didn't have a cellular telephone, Lewis has said of the civil rights movement. At age 25, he also helped launch a march for voting rights at the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, where he and other marchers were met by heavily armed state and local police who attacked them with clubs, fracturing Lewis's skull. So when people say things like you should vote because people died for your rights to vote, or you should participate because people were beaten, this is what they were talking about. When things were really, really bad, and they're bad now, but things were really even worse because you had Jim Crow, all of these segregation rules and regulations in the 60s that nobody from my generation on up has had to deal with because of the work that these men did. But they basically got their teeth kicked in because of it. John Lewis had his skull fractured because they beat them with clubs. Unarmed protesters, and they sent in men in the heavily armed men with clubs to beat them down. So that's what these guys had to deal with. Images from that Bloody Sunday shocked the nation and galvanized support for the Voting Rights Act of 1965, signed into law by President Lyndon B. Johnson. In 2011, after more than 50 years on the front lines of the civil rights movement, America's first black president placed the Presidential Medal of Freedom on his neck. Lewis has described attending President Barack Obama's 2009 inauguration as an out-of-body experience. When he announced that he'd been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in December, he vowed to fight. "I have been in some kind of fight for freedom, equality, basic human rights for nearly my entire life. I have never faced a fight quite like the one I have now," he said in a statement. Alright guys, so now let's talk about Cordy Tyndale Vivian, better known as the Reverend C.T. Vivian. C.T. Vivian was also a major force in the civil rights movement. He worked alongside King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the struggle for racial equality. And like Lewis, he was also part of the Freedom Riders, civil rights activists who rode through southern states to make sure bus terminals and other public facilities were not segregated. His civil rights action started decades ago with his first nonviolent protest in 1947, a lunch counter sit-in in Peoria, Illinois. That's not too far from where I live at. Vivian had a strong religious upbringing, and he and other ministers founded the Nashville Christian Leadership Conference, an affiliate of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. The group helped organize sit-ins and civil rights marches. Some of the marches ended in violence against him. He once led a group of people to register to vote in Selma, Alabama, despite defiance by a local sheriff who blocked the group. "We will register to vote because as citizens of the United States, we have the right to do it," he told that sheriff. The sheriff responded by beating Vivian until blood dripped off his chin in front of rolling cameras. The image helped galvanize wider support for change. Vivian also created a college readiness program to help care for children kicked out of school for protesting racism. The U.S. Department of Education used his program as a guide to create Upward Bound, which was designed to improve high school and college graduation rates for students in underserved communities. In the late 1970s, Vivian founded an anti-racism organization that focused on monitoring the Ku Klux Klan, and he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2013 by President Barack Obama. So yeah, guys, these dudes were just boots on the ground, always in action. They were doing it, and they were fighting for racial equality for years and years and years and years, basically until they passed away. What I'd like to do now is just send shout outs and prayers for the family of John Lewis and C.T. Vivian. I would like to say thank you to John Lewis and C.T. Vivian for your bravery, your honor, your hard work. We couldn't do the things that we're doing today without you guys doing what you did in the 60s. And that's just the truth. And the fact that both of you took beatings for it. A guy punched Reverend C.T. Vivian on camera. He didn't even care. Sound familiar, guys? They beat John Lewis and fractured his skull because they were hitting him with clubs on camera. Sound familiar? If you guys don't know, racism doesn't care if a camera is there. It's gonna show you what it is. And that's just what it is. Once again, thank you, gentlemen. Rest in peace. We love you, we miss you, and hopefully people will now learn how to continue to work and walk in your footsteps. So alright fam, if you like this video, please give it the big thumbs up and share this all over the internet. Now if you're new here, I'd like to say, hey, what's up? And hopefully you'll hit that subscribe button and join the family. If you guys want to get in touch with me, you can always get in touch with me on Twitter and Instagram at DKG72. I also have a Facebook fan page and a TikTok that's David Gordon72. And if you guys really like what you see on the channel, go ahead and hit the link for my Patreon. It's in the description below. Head over to Patreon, choose a tier, and support the channel. Alright guys, it's your boy DKG72, and I'm out. Peace.